Morning, everybody. I'm super excited to welcome two amazing guests today. Richard Chambers, who I've known for a while, and then Michael Gerber, who has been literally a myth and a legend, who is also here to discuss this whole concept of entrepreneurship and what it means and how it has been and how it's forming today. But before I get started, Richard, I'd love to have you take a minute and introduce yourself, and maybe you can also do an introduction for Michael.
I'm Richard Chambers. Many people in the distribution channel know me from a sales enablement program called the SALES system, sales system. It's a model of collaboration. And what's interesting for me today, sitting here with Sugata and Michael Gerber, is that the three of us represent kind of the foundation of my particular company, which is my background is in psycholinguistics, which I can go into in much greater detail. But the selling language, the selling process has at its core a common language. But it was inspired by Michael, with whom I worked many, many years ago, in terms of automating systems. And selling is a system of using language. And it's only over the years that I've found that it's through partnerships, and that's where Sugata organization and I met, is that my customers now work together co-selling, and having a common language with co-selling partners is the opportunity that I'm continuing to work on. And so with that very brief description, I need to just segue over to Michael, and I'll go into much more detail how Michael and I met a long time ago. But his book, The E-Myth, and his series of E-Myth have inspired not only Sugata, but many other people. And it's the core of my business. And so I'm going to hand it over to Michael to give his story.
Well, thank you, Richard. I'm delighted to be here, Sugata and Richard. I come, obviously, as you know, from a long line now, over a half century of doing the work that we've been doing, pursuing the question, what's missing in this picture? Why is it that of the millions of startups every year, not only here in America, but throughout the world, that fully 90% of them will be out of business before they reach their 10th anniversary? Let me say that again. Fully 90% of them will be out of business before they reach their 10th anniversary. So what in the world is missing in this picture? What's wrong? And so I set out on a path to discover what's wrong. Why is it most companies can't survive, stay alive, do what they presumed they set out to do, to start a business and to lead a great life? What's missing in this picture is the most significant question that's lived at the heart of everything I've been doing all this time. I have an answer to that question. I've learned what the answer is to that question, and that's what I'd love to share with you.
That's amazing. So maybe we can go back at the very beginning. How did this idea came into your mind, Michael? How did you get started? What led you to write the first book? I know there have been multiple reprints since then. So can you walk us through that very moment? He said, I figured it out. I'm going to write it.
I'd be delighted to. My brother-in-law is still my brother-in-law. It's amazing that after all these years, his name is Ace Remus. Ace had an advertising agency in Silicon Valley, a startup. And he started up doing what he does, and he's brilliant at what he does. And he came to me one day and he said, Gerber, I got a problem. I create all these great leads for my clients, and yet they can't convert them into clients. They can't convert them into customers. And I have no idea what's wrong there. Can you help me meet with one of my clients and see what's missing in this picture? I said, Ace, I don't know anything about business, because I didn't think about business. In those years that Ace came to me, I was thinking about everything but business. But in any case, he said, Michael, you know more than you think you do. Just do it. Just come and let's see what happens. And so I went to visit this first client, we'll call Bob. I forget his name today. And Ace introduces me to Bob. Ace says, guys, I'm going to take off for an hour, get to know each other. And he splits. And Bob looks at me, sort of discomfited by sitting with this guy called Gerber, who doesn't know who's going to fix his business. So he asked me the obvious question, Michael, what do you know about my business? My answer was, obviously, nothing, Bob. The look on his face got even a little bit more estranged. And he says to me, well, if you don't know anything about my business, what do you know about my product? And I said, even less than that, Bob. So how can you help me, Gerber? I haven't a clue, Bob. Ace thinks I can. We've got an hour to kill. Let's find out. And so the next hour, Sugata, I began to ask Bob questions. Question after question after question after question. And what became absolutely apparent to me is that not only didn't I know about Bob's business, but Bob didn't either. And it was a shock to me. How can somebody start a business in Silicon Valley, hire salespeople, invest in the service that he was going to deliver, and not even understand what a business is? And what do I mean by that? I asked Bob one very foundational question. I said, Bob, what's your selling system? And Bob said to me, what's a selling system? And I said, Bob, that's why you're not converting the leads that Ace is creating for you, because you don't have one. Because you're depending upon people with sales experience who understand your product, but haven't a consistent, standardized, completely orchestrated way to do what it is you do. This is how we do it here. This is how we do it here is, in fact, what a selling system is. And Bob looked at me with that strange look again, and he said, well, Gerber, can you create a selling system for me? I said, sure, Bob. Ace picks me. Ace says, so Gerber, what happened? I said, he just hired me. He hired you to create a selling system for him. He said, how can you create a selling system for him? You don't know anything about business. You don't know. Ace, that's what I told you when you asked me to come here. But what I realized is I know more than either of you. And that began the creation of the E-Myth, Sugata, because I began to sit down with Bob to create his selling system. But as I began to sit down with Bob to create a selling system, I also discovered he didn't have a management system. And as I discovered he didn't have a management system, I said, and on and on and on and on. He didn't have a system for doing anything that he did. And therein resided the influence to begin going to work on Ace's company to create that selling system, that business development system. And it became obvious to me while I was doing that. And then for another one of his clients and another one of them, it didn't matter what the business was, didn't matter what they did, didn't matter what their service, what their products were. It was completely universal. I then said, Ace, let me tell you what the problem is. You don't have a system. And that's when Ace and I decided to part company, because Ace didn't want to hear anything about that from me. So Ace sent in a guy to replace me, and the guy's name was Tom Travisano. And Tom Travisano was going to sit by my right shoulder and watch what I do. And so Tom sat by my right shoulder to watch what I did. Client number one, client number two, this one, that one, this one, that one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and so forth. And finally, Tom asked me the question, so Gerber, where are you going? Why are you leaving? I said, I'm going to start a company to do the very thing we're doing here. He said, I'm going with you. And so Tom and I joined together to create the very first true business development firm of its kind called the Michael Thomas Corporation, the Michael Thomas Business Development Program. This was in 1977, Sugata. And we went to work on the Michael Thomas Business Development Program with four very distinct pictures. First, I have a dream. Second, I have a vision. Third, I have a purpose. Fourth, I have a mission. My dream then, way back then in 1977, was to transform the state of small business worldwide. My vision was to invent the McDonald's of small business development services. My purpose was the story that lived at the very heart of everything I just described to you. What's the problem? What's the problem? Why is it that everybody's suffering this disaster called startup, startup, startup? Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. And finally, the mission. So those are the four primary ingredients that lived at the very heart of MTC at the very beginning as we went to work on our company to build that system that then became the thing that led to the book 10 years later. And it came to the book 10 years later because one of the very critical things we did to attract new small business clients was what we called the Key Frustrations Workshop. And the Key Frustrations Workshop was a 3-hour-long seminar, originally written by me, then led by me, then led by others who I trained to lead it. And all our salespeople would do would go down the street knocking on doors and say, come to the seminar, come to the seminar, come to. We charged for it first. We charged $1,000 for it first. We charged $52 a session. Then we gave it away free. And it just filled the seminar, filled the seminar, filled the seminar. To do what? To tell the story that the EMIS story you've loved those years ago and that we've shared with so many millions of small business owners now, with now 34 books, Sugata, that we've written and published. You got to read all of them.
Well, I'm going to try to get some of those ideas into this discussion. So I want to take maybe in a few minutes, go to Richard, because Richard, you're also very passionate about the sales system. So maybe you can double click, on that word from your perspective, what it really means, what it was and what it is today, and where do you think it's kind of going?
Well, I'm just reliving Michael's story there because, and so there's a backstory before I met Michael. I've got a doctorate in psycholinguistics and education, and I was at Berkeley, at MIT and Berkeley, in the 70s, were the core of artificial intelligence. It was very aspirational, artificial intelligence, as if we were trying to colonize the moon. It was so distant. It was a combination of psychologists and computer scientists and linguists and anthropologists, all trying to figure out how do you get computers to understand language. And so there's a 50-year ago AI element to my efforts that at in a kind of a hype cycle inflated expectations at that point about where we were headed. Unfortunately, when I graduated, it was in the trough of disillusionment, where it was an AI winter, there was no investment in it, and I was out of a job. So I needed work. And I saw an ad that Michael had placed in a Sunday paper, if you remember those days of recruiting, and met with him. And we're sitting in a little conference room, and he's laying out this org chart that had like 80 people on it, his vision of what he was building. This was just one of the branches, let alone the whole regional and corporate structure. And there were 5 people in the company. But it was everything I wanted. I wanted the research and analysis. I wanted to understand businesses, and I knew nothing about business. And so I qualified because I didn't bring to it any preconceptions. And over the course of 7 years working with Michael, I went from being the part of the totem pole that's under the ground to running all the services delivered to CEOs through about 80 people, franchisees and so forth. I had an opportunity to work with about 700 CEOs over that 7-year period. And since then, maybe about 1,500 businesses in total. So it was abstract, understanding all the principles that Michael had been describing in terms of entrepreneurship and seeing what's common. And when I started my own company, that background had given me the ability to work with a variety of businesses. The shopping centers is where I started with 50 different tenants. So they all had a different kind of business, but there was something at the core of it that was the same. And this was this sales language. Now, I'd read plenty of sales books, but what I brought to this from the psycholinguistics background was that the mind has a certain limitation. You can handle only about 7 chunks of information. And I had been given a 23-step sales process earlier, the Xerox selling model. You get about 17 steps into it, and you have to pull out a wallet card to remind yourself where you are in the process. And so I knew that with this SALES model, the mind was contained. The mind could contain that. So it just so happened that I started working with a computer retail shop which became the largest Computerland franchise. And over 15, 20 years, this SALES model had become a standard within the IT reselling channel. Started B2B, moved to a 1-tier reselling model. HP, basically, MDF from HP basically put my kids through college and paid off my mortgage. And then it moved into distributors as that evolved, and then 2-tier distribution. And so this model has continued, which brought me then to the partnership, because what I started seeing is the collaboration that I've been providing for individual sales organizations became more pressing when co-selling occurred with the whole partnership model that's happening now. It was still very manual in terms of the collaboration model. And so what I'm discovering now, and this is how I met you, Sugata, was the AI elements to accelerate that automation. And so I've spent maybe 5 years observing efforts of people to automate their selling engagement. It's just amazing innovations in filter, especially in the demand generation field, uncovering from 15,000 possible leads, who are the 200 that make most sense. But what I've been observing, and this is my current challenge and the opportunity, is that when those 200 start getting addressed through a sales conversation, the conversion rate is horrible. And so what I'm looking at is the human part of that meeting that still remains, beyond the AI, and that's the challenge that I'm looking for at this point.
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of go back to Michael, and kind of listening to both of you, that Michael's journey started with the conversation with an entrepreneur related to sales, and then Peter, of course, you spent significant of your career on that area. So when I go back to the book that I first read, I believe mid 80s or late 80s, E-Myth, and I found it fascinating, the system level thinking. But you talk about, Michael, 3 roles: technician, manager, and the entrepreneur. Why is not the salesperson in that 3 roles? Where, if sales is so important, if your journey began, why isn't that, technical versus sales versus, why are there 4 characters? Why are there only 3?
Well, you misunderstand with the word technician. The technician is the doer. The doer, whether that be the salesperson or the janitor or the bookkeeper, whomever is doing the work. So the technician is the doer. The manager is the overseer of the doer and what the doer does. The entrepreneur is the creator of what the manager is overseeing that the doer does. And so when you understand those 3 roles, you understand that the enterprise is launched not by the manager, not by the technician, God help us if either, but by the entrepreneur. There's an expression in Genesis, Sugata, born in the image of God. I then take that to say, born to create. And then I take that further and say, create a world fit for God. What in the world does that look like? That's the entrepreneur's role. The entrepreneur is the Imagineer in Walt Disney's term. And it's that Imagineer that is the creator underlying everything. So you are the Imagineer of your enterprise. And you're setting out to do what? To create a solution to transform the state of something that's triggered your attention on the planet. What is that thing you've set out to create? When we say that, what we're saying, I have a dream. Sugata's got a dream. The question becomes then, what is Sugata's dream? What is the dream of every single individual listening to us right now? And I can guarantee you, Sugata, they haven't a clue. But the dream isn't sufficient, because the next question is, so how do I manage to create that dream in reality? And that's the vision. And so the vision, I'm saying to every single person I'm speaking to, is to invent the McDonald's, I'll get to that, the McDonald's of whatever it is you're delivering. In my case, small business development services. In Richard's case, sales development. Richard, thank you. In Sugata's case, Sugata,
partner relationship management
development. So you get it. So suddenly, why the McDonald's? Because McDonald's is the most successful small business in the world. It was then, it is now. McDonald's is the most successful small business in the world. So what did they do and how did they do it to get where they are? 40,000 plus stores. Think about that. 40,000 plus stores. It's impossible. How did he get there? Ray Kroc, Follow the story. Ray Kroc was 53 years old when he opened his first McDonald's store. And Ray Kroc didn't work in the McDonald's store. He created a second office called corporate headquarters for McDonald's. And corporate headquarters for McDonald's was Ray Kroc himself and his assistant. So Ray Kroc went to work on the store to perfect the store, to get the store to do what the store had to do in a way that nobody had ever truly imagined. Not the McDonald brothers. Nobody imagined a fast food restaurant would ever be built. That's what he did. He went to work on the store because the store was the prototype. And he knew, until I get the store done just right, I'll never be able to create store number 2. First store number 1, then store number 2. Store number 2 is the exact replicate of store number 1, visually, emotionally, functionally, financially. But at the heart of all that, pardon me if I go on and on, at the heart of all that is the purpose. So understand, the dream is the product of the dreamer. There are 8 distinct personalities in every great entrepreneur: the dreamer, the thinker, the storyteller, the leader, the designer, the builder, the launcher, the grower. The dreamer, the thinker, the storyteller, the leader, the designer, the builder, the launcher, the grower. The dreamer has a dream. The thinker has a vision. The storyteller has a purpose. The leader has a mission. The designer has a client fulfillment system. The builder has a practice, which is the lead generation, lead conversion client fulfillment system, or your business format franchise. The prototype for what? For a business. And the next step is the business, which is nothing other than up to 10 turnkey practices, plus a turnkey management system, which then leads us to the enterprise, which is nothing other than a turnkey leadership system, plus a turnkey management system, or 10 turnkey businesses, or 49 turnkey practices. You get my point. Suddenly, at the very heart of all that is a great growing company, just like MTZ, just like McDonald's, just like every great, extraordinary company, and every single person listening to us right now. I don't care what company, what business, what they do, high tech, low tech, no tech, it makes absolutely no difference. The system is the solution, and it works, and it works, and it works, and it works. But let me add one last caveat. But it ain't AI, because AI is artificial. It's intelligent, but it's artificial. And what I just described isn't. What I just described is human. And if we succumb to the promise of artificial, our lives and our companies will become artificial, and the systems we create within them will be artificially created and artificially delivered, because there is no human being living within them. And key to what we just talked about, to what you live and do every day, Sugata, is you bring your spirit and your soul into every communication. And it's the soul of a company, the soul of an enterprise that we're really speaking about here.
This is incredible. So I'm going to come back to, the 3 kind of phases of growth that you talk about: infancy, adolescence, and maturity. I'll come back to that, but I want to go back to Richard for a few minutes. Richard, from this system perspective and maybe segment perspective, you spend a lot of time in the tech segment, right? Yeah. And as you said, you work with HP, you work with a bunch of resellers. And when you think about tech channel, it's driven by entrepreneurship, right? Of course, there's been a lot of mergers and acquisition, roll up, and going back to what Michael was saying, those are roll up of systems. You take one stores, make multiple stores, or you take multiple stores and you streamline them together. I actually interviewed a great entrepreneur from the MSP 20, Tim Conklin, who is rolling up MSPs. He has done 40 acquisitions of MSPs because he has figured out a business system, how managed service providers can be, acquired, streamlined, and operated to produce twice the EBITDA or 3 times the EBITDA that they have today, all going through systems, right? And so when I was talking to him, I was thinking about, the framework that Michael talks about, So what I want to come back to you is that within that vertical, tech vertical,
Yeah.
where we operate a lot, talk a little bit about the sales system, what it has been and what it is now, and where do you think it's going?
Well, I watched that Tim Conklin session recently and cut straight to the end where he held, and this ties into what Michael was saying too. He held up a mirror that was his tool that could figure out what the problem is in any business, and it's for the owner to hold that mirror up and say you're the problem. And so that ties back into the entrepreneur vision. And most of his MSPs that he had been accumulating had been technicians, and you gave the entrepreneur manager technician split earlier. The As I started in with working with resellers, most of these folks were technicians. As I assess myself too, I would say that I'm a little bit of an entrepreneur. Otherwise, I wouldn't have started a company. And I've got a vision for where this is headed. I'm not really a manager. I don't really like to manage other people. But I'm a technician of big time. And so the technical, but not for IT, technician in terms of how people engage with each other, behavioral technician. And largely it grew out of sociolinguistics and psycholinguistics and watching salespeople engage with each other while selling technology. And so as the technology has emerged, I mean, started with computers and then we've got some client server that started in there. And I don't know, I didn't know anything about this. I happened, Sybase, the co-founder of Sybase, basically coined the expression client server. So I worked with resellers as they were selling client server. Then internet came along. I still didn't understand the technology part of it, but what I did see is that the selling systems that were involved in that became increasingly involved with collaboration. One of the things that Michael mentioned is, and you mentioned earlier, you make a lot of mistakes along the way. One of Michael's principles earlier was quantifying mistakes. The whole system was to quantify your mistakes, keep trying. So it was easy for me to not feel deprived by not understanding the technology. I was watching what other people were trying to do. What I stumbled upon ultimately was that the solution sales in all of these areas were made with specialists. There was no one-man bands as these businesses got bigger. The business were started with one-man bands, but as they started growing, it was a group of specialists, salespeople, engineers, marketing people, and that for them to succeed in selling their solutions, they needed to collaborate because they were specialists that alone couldn't accomplish the job. So they had to collaborate, and so what goes with collaboration is the common language. If they didn't have a common language, there'd be wheel spin and errors. So the mission of my SALES model was to introduce this common language that let people collaborate. And so their choice was really did somebody want to have a simple common language or a complex common language? And I have a simple one to get them to actually get engaged. And then the question became, do you want to make one or do you want to buy one? Well, if they were going to make one themselves, they would have done it by now. So my model got involved, incorporated in that capacity. So that's kind of a thread of it. So let me let that be the answer.
Okay. So what I wanted to do is sort of go back to kind of the mid 80s where you're starting your business, Michael. You've kind of figured out the patterns you see. They're all kind of suffering from the same challenges and you can help. At the same time, when I was at Honeywell, it had a huge Six Sigma revolution that went through corporate America, the total quality circles, and it was all about systems, right? You focus on the customer, you try to build repeatable processes across the function, you track numbers and etc. So I can relate to from a big company perspective. And Peter Senge wrote that book on fifth discipline, the concept of learning organization. So when you take your journey and bring that to small or medium businesses, and I know you also work with larger companies, but looking through small and medium businesses, the reason I create that as a context is because most of the IT or tech or manufacturing reseller channel is driven by entrepreneurs, our small and medium businesses. Could be $1 million, could be $10 million, could be $50 million, but very, very founder led. And there is an M&A wave going on right now for roll up, bigger companies rolling them up. But if you go back to your framework when we're looking at them, what did a system mean to a small business when you walked in there and say, you got to build a system? What did they do on a Monday? Like, Friday you had a conversation. How did that transformation happen? Because I could relate that to, from Allied Signal or Honeywell, create master black belt, create black belt, create green belt, have projects across divisions, have metrics, part of the quarterly. That transformation was driven top down, bottoms up, took about 3 years to get through, right? But what is a small business who's worrying about cash flow and customer losses and employees quitting? And like, how do they make that transformation in a day to day?
Well, understand that they don't make the transformation at the outset. They listen to the story at the outset because they don't know what the problem is. Other than that, they're doing it, and driving themselves crazy, and nothing's working like they want it to. So now what? So you understand HP or Dell or whomever, whatever, that's irrelevant. And I say it's irrelevant when I'm speaking to the smallest of the small. So when I walk into the door with the smallest of the small, I introduce them by telling them a story. And I call that key frustrations in a small and growing business and what to do about them. I'm here to tell you there's a solution to every single problem you have. Join me in this seminar and we'll sit down for 3 hours. And when you walk out, you're going to be a completely different person. And if you're not a completely different person, you're going to come back to doing exactly what you're doing today. The seminar, that's the first thing we do. So when you say, how do I, that's the first thing. The second thing is the seminar. The seminar is the E-Myth. The seminar is the seminar of the E-Myth that you read, which starts out with a very simple, let me tell you a story. And so what we're doing right now is you're saying, Sugata, tell me your story. Let me tell you a story. Let me tell you how I started. Let me tell you what happened. I began to do that at the very beginning of this. My brother-in-law Ace asked me, blah, 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 blah. And the birth of E-Myth. The birth of E-Myth came from the discovery that no client of Ace's really understood what a business is, what a business needs to do in order for a business to successfully grow from a company of 1 to a company of 1,000. What is the process that one needs to engage in order to do that, and so forth. And here's the system. The system is a platform upon which every great enterprise is designed, built, launched, and grown. Everyone, every single one. HP, Dell, your company, Richard's company, any company on the face of the planet. It's a universal system. You mean to tell me somebody says there's a universal way of doing it? Yes. Let me share it with you. That's what's missing in this picture, Sugata. I don't get to selling software. I get to awaken the entrepreneur within. Because until we awaken the entrepreneur within, I don't care what the system is. It isn't going to do what, in fact, it's supposed to do because it's not a living system, and it has to be.
Michael, I want to stay with you for a minute. Richard, I'll come back to you. I do want to go back to one element that you talked about. In the end, it's about the human, not just being in the loop, but driving the loop when it comes to AI. So we'll keep the AI discussion away because from a human perspective, these 3 roles that you define, and then maybe 3 phases of growth that you define, right? Infancy, adolescence, and maturity. Can you talk a little bit about, do you see systemic patterns of failure when a company tries to go from an infancy to adolescence to maturity? And then how do these roles need to change through this journey? Because are the system the blocker, or are the roles the blocker for a company to go from one phase to another to another?
Neither the system nor the roles, but the point of view, the perspective, the understanding of what we're talking about. And so what's missing in almost every single case is neither the person and their experience, the role and what they're supposed to be doing, the accountability and what they're supposed to be performing, but their understanding of what this methodology actually is. So let's go back to the beginning again. We always, Sugata, and I'm suggesting this as a strategy, always go back to the beginning. And when I say always go back to the beginning, always go back to the beginning to start with. So, what was your dream? Tell me. So, what was your vision? So, what was your purpose? So, what was your mission? And as we do that, we begin to see what's missing in this picture. Oh, they forgot what their dream was. So they thought it was, they did this, they did that, they got lost. And it's a state of being lost that you discover in every single individual you'll ever speak to. They have to get back to the beginning. And that's a process that's universal. So let me ask you a question again. One says, that's the system. So let me ask a question. I understand you got a problem. I understand that isn't working. I understand you're frustrated by this or et cetera. But let's forget that for a moment. Let's go back to the beginning. You remember when we started our conversation? What did we start it with? And it all begins again. And as we begin that conversation again, and Richard can attest to this because I did it way back then, years ago with Richard. Richard learned to do that. Go back to the beginning, go back to the beginning, go back to the beginning, because something's missing in this picture and they're lost. And when one learns that leadership role, something absolutely spectacular occurs. So that's the key ingredient, Sugata, to the process. There are 8 personalities. What are those? The dreamer, the thinker, the storyteller, the leader, the designer, the builder, the launcher, the grower. Yes, in every company on the planet, for all time, from the past to the future. The dreamer has a dream, the thinker has a vision. You got my point. I can repeat this nauseatingly again and again and again, but it's so true. But you don't hear anybody else saying it. And you don't hear anybody else saying it because they don't understand what an entrepreneur is. They use the word, and use the word, anybody who starts a company is an entrepreneur, but that's not true. The E-Myth says that's not true. The vast majority of people who start their own company aren't entrepreneurs, but technicians suffering from an entrepreneurial seizure. They start a company to get rid of the boss, become their own boss, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could tell this story ad nauseum, and I have told it ad nauseum, but that's my point. Remember the story.
I'll pick up on one of the points you made because you had said that back to the beginning over and over. In the 7 years I spent under Michael's mentorship, so much of the client relationships rested on what was that dream of the client, and all of our business development efforts, installing systems, cash systems, marketing systems, were all aimed at aligning that work with what that dream and vision was for that customer. I believe that one of the best business lessons I ever had, we had a point during our growth where there was a lot of client dissatisfaction. And over about a 6-week period, I had pulled in maybe 15, 20 clients a day and put them in a room and said, how's it going? And it was like a double-barrel shotgun blast at me about what was the problem, what were the system, what were the mistakes we were having. And I learned something that was, as I talked to an individual, why did you start here? What was it that brought you in here in the first place? What was that business vision, that dream? What was it? And did that go away? And if it did, then there's something new to work. But if it didn't go away, then how do we adjust what we do so that we can still pursue it? That constant returning to the vision, which I built into my program in terms of and the smile, ask, listen, educate, start model at the listen step. You're trying to understand what an end user customer.
So Richard, you essentially talked about the reseller space that we're talking about. These are mostly entrepreneurs, and as you said, they're all technically bent. They were the technician. And as we know, the buyer space, the IT buyer space, rapidly evolving, right? Previously, they used to buy directly from resellers. Today, they go online. They buy a significant portion of things directly. And they're looking for what used to be a resale organization today to be a solutions organization, right? Design, deploy, maintain, manage. But they don't buy from them anymore, right? Even if they did, it's not a portion of the revenue. So if I'm an entrepreneur who started, let's say in the IT sector, right, as a reseller business 20 years ago or 30 years ago, my business today is completely different, right? So I want to go back to the notion of vision I started with a vision who I wanted it to be as IT, reseller or a channel partner or whatever. But the reality and the context around me has changed, right? And keeps on changing. And it's even changing now. So, how, when you see the companies that make the pivot from one set of context drivers to a next set of context driver, from an entrepreneurial perspective, working with the reseller, have you seen the ones that have made the changes and not just stayed alive, but succeeded and grown with the waves, and the others that have gone out of business, going back to Michael's number, then 90% of them within 10 years? At 10 years, it's like one or two technology life cycle, right? So what has been your experience?
Well, there's been my experience and there's their experience. My experience is that major changes have affected who my customer base is. And so that presumes that they're changing too. So the advent of the internet was probably the biggest change. And the small businesses who were break fix organizations or product organizations, the ones that succeeded were ones that understood that the end user customer was going through change and didn't just have a transactional need, but needed some assessment. They needed to figure out what exactly do I need to be able to do? And those resellers developed the capability of providing those assessments. They had been giving away their configuration services. The successful ones realized, how do I charge now to be able to provide my configuration services? Where traditionally they had been making their money on the implementation and the deployment, now they were not just getting the margin from the sale of hardware. They were learning how to also charge for those deployment services. And once it was deployed, they were learning how to now get paid for the support, most of which along that way had been just embedded within the sale of the transaction. So at the start, many of the distributors were providing some of those services, assessment services, design services, and so forth. The smarter partners were developing those internally. So as I was coaching the various resellers, what I was helping them do was to realize that it wasn't just one sale. There was an assessment sale, there was a configuration sale, there's a deployment sale, there's a support sale, there's an ongoing health check that leads to the next. And so there's this whole cycle. And businesses have now grown where many are providing those separate services. And so the thread that I've seen is that smart ones started to develop in-house the ability to provide those services. Originally, my engagement with them was to help them collaborate. So within their organization, the sales and the service marketing folks would work together to be able to tell their story about how they were helping those end users. As it developed, there would be many organizations that were specialists in assessment. They weren't reselling anything. Many that were consultants who were able to provide configuration services. And so now the whole partnering element came into play, where they still need to collaborate to be able to work together. And what I'm now helping them do is to have a common process whereby two different organizations can get their staffs working together in much the way that I've been helping the individual technology companies integrate internally. So that's a lot of the flow that I'm seeing. I'm still trying to learn. I'm not saying that I've got it all figured out now. What I'm seeing is there has been this thread that has tied together the discussions we've had here today related to partnership, related to automation, related to the psychology of selling. And it's going someplace. I don't know where. But what my search is, and which excited me about meeting you, Sugata, is the people you have around you. There are people that I want to continue collaborating with to keep learning. I believe there's value to add to what some of these technology companies are doing, and I'm seeing the value added to my business. Whereas maybe 5 years ago, I would be engaged with somebody helping them with their demand generation and helping the SDRs with their phone pitches. Now what I'm finding is that so much of the software is able to tee up these meetings that had taken weeks and weeks and weeks to get. Now instantly there's a meeting. So the opportunity that I'm seeing right now is that once those meetings are scheduled, how do you engage in those as a human so that you are able to be successful? And it comes back to the beginning that Michael had mentioned earlier, that end user customer has some outcome thereafter. You have to keep returning to that. What is it that they're after, and help them get there.
So let's go back to the beginning to Michael again. So Michael, so if you I forget exactly in what chapter, but I distinctly remember you talked about a cookie business. And so if we go back to, let's say, certain types of businesses, like, I live in the East Bay in Silicon Valley in Pleasanton. We have a great little, downtown here. There have been restaurants that I've been going to for almost 30 years. And then their restaurant, they come and go. And a lot of the time I think that food was not that different, right? And so when you think about, those entrepreneurs that starting running successful, like a food business and a restaurant business, the level of change that they have to go through versus the other spectrum that Richard is talking about in the technology space, where things are dramatically changing. Do the entrepreneurs today, like when I think about an Olympian today, like you look at Michael Phelps, the level of effort that he put in and the system around him, what makes him a machine is a product of multiple things. So is the bar for an entrepreneur today is significantly higher than it was 20 years or 30 years ago, or some things are eternally true and they remain true? What is your reflection? Because you've seen a lot.
It's no different today, Sugata. It's no different. The question becomes, how does one start a company? Think of that. You're suddenly a university professor, and the very first question you're raising to your class, you're all here supposedly to learn how to start a company. I'm going to teach you step by step exactly how, explicitly how to start a company, no matter what you want to do. And we're going to start with a blank piece of paper and beginner's mind. Hear me, a blank piece of paper and beginner's mind, whether that was 40 years ago or today or 1,000 years from today. A blank piece of paper and beginner's mind. Step one, and it begins. So I'm going to suggest that the thesis I just stated, which may sound terribly outdated, because we're not talking sophisticated systems, tech, etc. We're talking about something so fundamental that it sounded wrong then, just like it sounds wrong today. And yet, the one who says, yes, teach me, that one who says, I don't know how to do this, teach me. And I say, great, so let's begin at the beginning. You follow me? And so what we've created, our methodology, our singular product at the Michael Gerber companies, our singular product today is the Dreaming Room. And the Dreaming Room is the 8-fold path delivered in 12 weekly 90-minute events to walk the participant through awakening the entrepreneur within, the dream, the vision, just like I expressed it to you. At the end of the Dreaming Room, we go into Dreaming Room 2, which deals with the second 4 steps: the job, the practice, the business, the enterprise. And the job, the practice, the business, the enterprise are the product of the first 4 steps: the dream, the vision, the purpose, and the mission. And Sugata, I can promise you this because I have done this so many times now. Something happens in my students, our participants in the Dreaming Room, and will happen with every single person you would ever put in to a Dreaming Room. Their minds are blown. How come nobody ever told me this before? They say. That's what needs to happen. And I'm saying, you can do that with your network. Richard can do that with his network. Anybody and everybody can do that with any network and effectively have predictably, identically the very same result. That suddenly there's a foundation for designing, building, launching, and growing a great growing company, whatever the great growing company is. From a company of 1 to a company of 1,000. I repeat that again and again and again. From a company of 1 to a company of 1,000. The McDonald's of what you do, why you do it, how you do it, etc., and so forth. I repeat the story again and again.
Yes, so I want to go back to Richard. I have one question for you, and then I have a last question for Michael.
Yes.
So, Richard, going to from a sales system perspective, it is a key driver for growth, right? And one of the thing in the tech space, and you have alluded to this, we have seen like thinking about the customer, sort of beginning with the end in mind in a full life cycle. It's not a transaction.
Right.
You own a customer for life. You look at, total value of the customer. You look at other things that they procure. Amazon is a classic example of that, the entire life cycle ownership, right? In every possible way. So when you think about from a growth perspective, when it comes to the sales system, traditionally the reseller channel has been tech centric, troubleshoot centric. They moved to managed services. The discussion we had with MSP 20, he's trying to take it to the next level. And one new element, two words that have emerged, not AI, but customer success.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of new, 5, 6, 7 years we're hearing about this, right?
Right.
And sales, the great discovery has been it's not what happens at a transaction, it's what happens throughout the life cycle, right?
Right.
So what do you see from a transformation perspective in the channel, the companies that are trying to get ready from a partner side?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, they have to collaborate.
Yeah.
Of course, they have to work with multiple people. Are you seeing their systems are evolving to address not just a transaction, not just management of services, but really thinking through the totality of what is the customer trying to solve? Because customers' context is changing, right?
Yeah.
They're acquiring the business, etc. So what do you see there?
Well, they're finally trying to listen to me. After 38 years of this, and I cited the example with Michael, where I'm pulling all the clients into the room, saying, "How's it going?" And customer success was what I was accountable for. Retention of customers. We had basically a subscription based business 40 years ago. And so what I'm seeing, and this kind of I bristle at the long-term value notion of customer success. I mean, I'm all about customer success. That's the core of what I do. And I've had long-term customer value, described to me in terms of the prospective cash flow that a business might generate from a customer long term. That's great. We all want that. That's what the entrepreneur wants. However, I'm a technician. I am accountable for making somebody successful. And you've heard Michael this morning. Imagine 7 years of listening to Michael. The entrepreneur rubs off on the technician, and so it was enough for me to start a business. But really, what's at the core of it is I need to see that a business is succeeding. And so I'm launching into a 38-year review right now. And by the way, 1 to 4% of businesses that started in 1987 are still around. And so I attribute the resilience to be able to turn on a dime as needed to stay alive in business. But the one constant thread has been helping the business succeed, helping other people's business succeed. And I define long-term value now in terms of what's lifetime value in terms of what impact have I had on their lives. And so I've been digging back recently with people that from the 80s, from the 90s, from the aughts, from the 10s, people who graduated from my program. I'm not getting a penny from them anymore. It's not a cash flow issue. How has it affected their lives? And I'm hearing these extremely warm, rich stories about, they may not even be in technology anymore. One gentleman is a psychotherapist, others an architectural sign builder now, and certain parts of the smile ask, listen, educate, start element they'll cling to. Someone will say, I go into a meeting now with a start mentality instead of a close, or I'm going into a meeting with someone and with a listen focus. It's not methodical like my business, but it's impacted their lives. So to me, that's I welcome this transition to customer success. However, my urging to people is to be thinking beyond just the cash flow, and think, how are you actually impacting their lives? Because that's going to affect your cash flow from somebody else as they become a raving testimonial for you. That's my vision on it.
Thank you. And which is a great segue to my last question for Michael. Michael, I came to this country as an immigrant. I got a scholarship. I came to study almost 40 years ago. Never looked back. It's been an amazing journey. So I want to go back to the idea of America, right? When you think about an enterprise, when you think about founding something, with legacy that lasts, we think about, attracting people, inspiring people from within and from outside. When you go back to the founding fathers, and if you apply the three roles, who were the technicians, who were the managers, who were the entrepreneurs, at that very beginning in your mind?
In the very beginning, you might say it was an entrepreneurial conclave. I think about the founding fathers as the quintessential entrepreneurs or Imagineers of America. They created something that had never been conceived before, ever. And they put out the rules of the game, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And those became the fundamental principles leading us, driving us today, to the degree they are leading us, driving us today. So, thinking like that, one would then raise that question about the entrepreneurial conclave coming together and creating America. It's the perfect story, Sugata, to bring to every single small business, mid-business, large business, anywhere in the world. What's your America? And it's so inspirational because it's so true. And even when you say it, you speak it, I see the respect, the feeling you have for it when you shared it with us just now. That's the beginning of every great enterprise. They had a problem. They had to get rid of the boss. And the boss was Great Britain. And they said no more. So they founded a new enterprise. And the new enterprise was called America. You get it.
If I can add
I don't
one
have to
thought on
repeat
that,
it.
my company name's America's Return. It's not a political statement. It's a return. It's a return to an ideal. And as Michael describes that entrepreneurial vision,
Yeah.
That's what I'm aligned with as well.
Amazing. Well, gentlemen, hour and a half just flew by. Thank you for being here. I know how busy two of you are. One thing, Michael, I can tell you, I was just counting in my mind how many hundreds of copies of, there are 3 books I give away. One is Stephen Covey's, one is yours, another one is Peter Sengi's. So I have possibly given several hundred books away, and I'm going to go back, and I did not know there are 34 different books now in publication. I'm going to look them up, but thank you for being here. I'd love to meet you face to face one of these days. I'm going to look up one of these seminars that you're going to be there in personally, and I'm going to show up. So thank you.
My delight. My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great one.